Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Kim Newman is an award-winning author, critic, broadcaster and journalist. He's a long-time collaborator of mine over the Green Ink-sponsored Write for Macmillan Cancer Support. And what I absolutely adore about Kim's career is that you can see what he loves in all of it, whether he is reviewing work, novelising people who love what he loves. The sense of humour, the passion for his subjects makes him the best person to speak to about loving what you do and doing what you love. There's a wonderful quote at the top of the Kim Newman website from Eugene Byrne in the introduction to Unforgivable Stories. If you remember the fashions of the 1970s, you'll recall that in winter, chaps wore anoraks, crombies or parkas. Kim wore an opera cape. For me, that's the best introduction I could give you to what I think is probably my favourite way to live, which is to show up as yourself in all of the ways, not least. Has it been a writing day, Kim? Have you been working?
Yeah, not much, but I mean, I'm still not. I'm waiting for editorial notes, so I can't start anything big. So I'm just doing bits and pieces.
Kim, one of the things from the Writer's Gym point of view that is most important to me and sort of how I started doing the things I was doing, creative confidence, growing your writing life and beating the inspiration addiction. One of the things that I liked best reading the Johnny Alucard website was the biog paragraph near the top when you're talking about family and education, where you declare, I have never held down a conventional job. And
yeah, that's still true.
Yeah. Every time I read that, I remember being in my 20s and not having got the vibe that actually that was fine. I was still trying to get into a very sensible shaped box. Was it like that for you ever, or did you just realise, no?
I'm the second generation in my family to have to work like this. My parents were potters. My dad was a sculptor. So I grew up with them working for themselves rather than doing proper jobs. And I think even they had Mum had done a little bit of work as a waitress, and Dad did sort of student stuff like working in an all-night taxi rank, making cups of tea. That's about it. And they did that when they were teenagers. Since before I was born, they didn't have conventional jobs. So it wasn't an expectation in my family. All the arguments had been had with their parents and were over and done with before I came along. So I think that's one of the big advantages I had, is just not having that expectation or pressure put on you to get a proper job, whatever that means.
Do you think that there was any, does it work the opposite way? Was that therefore a conventional choice, or was it still, how it was for me, where it was still other? Because you're kind of inventing your own job, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's never, when I graduated, which was in 1980, I spent a couple of years in a sort of desultory way applying for jobs in like marketing or publicity or publishing, but never got very far. I had one or two interviews, but no job offers. So I twigged quite early on that this wasn't a route that was available to me, or that was particularly important to me. That said, I also was well aware that it was entirely possible to go through your entire life never really doing anything. I know people who are my contemporaries who have essentially drifted through life not having jobs, on various forms of benefits or living off relatives or whatever, and, are now retired from that. So that was an option. That was something that I kind of thought wasn't unlikely to happen to me. What's more, I'm not going to condemn people who choose to live lives like that. I don't particularly see if they're happy with it.
For me, it sounds a lot like the need to get rid of the shoulds. That if it is a case of I should have a life like this or I should have a life like that, that in a way is the enemy.
Maybe I never considered, what I should do. I just did what I was doing. And sure, I could have made things easier on myself in all kinds of ways. And either chose not to or from ignorance didn't.
How could you have made things easier for yourself?
when I was at school, like everybody at school in Britain, you talk to a careers officer at some point. And I remember the careers officer saying to me that you could go into advertising. And I thought, yeah, probably could. I've got that kind of mind. I could easily sit around and come up with slogans and campaign ideas and that sort of stuff. It didn't really interest me that much. I could have focused on that, but whether that would have been in the long term easier for me. I suppose what it is I never really considered the writing that I was doing, and I'd started writing in my very early teens as a career path. It was just a thing I did. George Bernard Shaw said that writing was like the taste of water in his mouth. It wasn't a thing he ever thought of. It was a thing that he just did. And it fit into his life. And, in the end, it took over mine. I mean, I would probably still have continued doing the kind of writing I was doing for fanzines or amateur theatre happily throughout the rest of my life. The fluke is that, eventually this stuff got published or seen and other people read it. But that came a long way after doing the actual work.
When you said you could have made it easier for yourself, in a way, would that not have made it harder? Because if it's something that you don't like, I wonder if there's an element of choosing to use your powers for good, if I can put it like that.
I mean, I was a kid that when I was making these decisions, I was stupid. I wasn't making a conscious choice. I wasn't thinking long term. I was thinking moment to moment. And it just, at some point, and it happened in sort of late 1982, 1983, I realized that I could actually make a living doing what I was doing anyway. And that was probably the moment of change. And since then, I have made actually a reasonable living. I'm not enormously wealthy, but I know from all those charts that appear online occasionally about how little writers earn that I'm comparatively doing terribly well.
Yeah. And it's also about making your own decisions about what constitutes success in terms of, if you're not somebody that needs to spend a fortune on 20 Lamborghinis and expensive holidays every 5 minutes.
Don't drive.
Me too.
And I hate to say it, but most of my holidays have been free for the last 20, 30 years. I tend to get invited to film festivals and things, so my life has been made quite easy in that way. There are some benefits to being what I am.
And it's not to oversimplify and say, don't worry, everybody, just become special guest at every festival you've ever dreamed of. But at the same time,
it does kind of work out, if you, I mean, it's not something I tried for or angled for, but every couple of years I get invited to something nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, at the risk of Bottom-tail diamond shoes too tight, which this is probably going to sound like, the sacrifice is worth it. And I mean, if you're doing a job you love, the energy to need to get away from it is a very different proposition to if you're doing a job that you're bored with.
That's also true. I don't necessarily, the concept of holidays as such it doesn't really mesh with what I do. I mean, I'm always thinking it, at the very least, even if I'm not writing, there's always something going on. So I don't actually have actually I saw somebody online talking about this today, the job life demarcation. I think I have a job life integration.
Yes.
Which isn't the same as being a workaholic. It hasn't completely, dominated my life or taken me over or become a destructive thing. It's just that I am always conscious that most things I do, including just lying around on the sofa thinking, feed into writing.
Big thing with a lot of the people I work with is permission. Now, I realise this is not going to be new thoughts for you, but I think there's a certain amount that is human nature that sometimes we can fight with giving ourselves permission to be, yes, we're going for a walk or lying on the sofa, but actually that's the fuel, isn't it?
Yeah, although, again, that's never been an issue for me. It's never something I've given much thought to.
Has there been any kinds of permission you've had to do more on manual than automatically?
No, not really.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's like, I suppose because alongside writing fiction, I've written a lot of journalism and criticism. So I've sort of learned stuff like how to meet word counts or deadlines, deal with editorial feedback, different publications, templates, doing stuff like this. I've done a lot of broadcasting, talking. So all those things is just kind of you learn disciplines from that, which are applicable to the larger task of, say, writing a novel. I know a lot of people struggle with, lack of structure in their day. I don't have that, and I'm not even one of those people who's obsessive about, sitting down to work at 9 o'clock in the morning and doing some amount of wordage a day or whatever. And as long as a thing gets finished by the time I say it will, by the time I have promised it will, then nobody really cares if you wrote it at 3 in the morning or 11 in the
Or it's
morning.
never going to know.
No, it's not a thing that those kind of works, and they shouldn't be part of a reader's expectations or even interests. Nobody cares how fast you wrote it. I think in the business, there is a certain sense people do care that you keep your word. I do think that missing deadlines, which is something that Douglas Adams made jokes about, and then the thing is, Douglas Adams was actually emotionally and artistically crippled by his inability to meet deadlines. So quoting amusing things he said about it is probably a bad idea. But I sort of think that once you've given your word, you deliver. Because eventually life will come at you and you can't. And if you've cried wolf, if you've been late with everything throughout your life, and there's that one time you break your leg and can't do it, although in fact even breaking your leg probably wouldn't stop you. But I mean, if you're in a coma or whatever, if there's some kind of hideous crisis means that you actually cannot do something, then you've earned it if you've been reliable for the rest of the time.
Absolutely. One of the things that we come back to again and again is seeking to be interested, not interesting, finding what interests you in your writing. And I do feel like your career is one of the most beautiful examples of that. I mean, not least that the identity that you've bonded with as Johnny so hard and Dracula, us about the themes, or were there things you jettisoned?
No, not at all. I mean, that's something I've now been exploring for over 30 years, that series, which is an intermittent series. It's not like a saga. It's not a one long connected story. It's something I can go back to from time to time, but I see all kinds of connections between pretty much everything I write, to be honest. I see threads going from book to book to book. I found a place that enables me to write about things that interest me either momentarily or for long periods of time.
Thread between works that you're talking about. If I were waving my magic wand and making one wish for the new writers that I work with, usually that wish is that we stop standing in our own way about the difference between memory and imagination and how freely you can mix and mess around with those. And recently with A Christmas Ghost Story, you were working with, I hesitate around the word nostalgia because it has all sorts of connotations that are negative, but the emotional content of that ghost story and families and who we think we are. There was a lot of references that I think were probably dear to you or experienced by you.
Oh yeah, I mean, in order to write a story like that, I mean, it's about Christmas, and I had to draw on my own family or family and friends and my generation's experience of certain things about Christmas in order to make that story work. There are also other things about stories about storytelling and a narrative and sort of ideas that I wanted to play around with. But also I just wanted to write something short. Yeah, I mean, I've been writing these long, complicated historical type stories, or in the case of the thing I was working on at the time, big fantasy novel. And for various reasons, I had to take a break. In fact, that's when I had to fail to deliver because I got COVID and I had a publication slot open. So I sort of said, well, if I wrote a novella in January, could we fit it in that autumn slot? And they responded to that. And I had this notion, which actually was it was a film outline originally. So I got that. It had to change a lot in order to become prose. But I wrote that in January last year for publication autumn last year. So it was nice to do something that was a fast turnaround. most of my books percolate for years before they get finished or even started in some cases. So I wanted just to do something smaller scale. And at some point after I did a book called An English Ghost Story, my then publicist Lydia said, "Why don't you write a Christmas ghost story?" And I finally did. So here it is.
Yeah.
But that means I had to address all the stuff that I thought of about Christmas ghost stories, and indeed about Christmas and ghosts and stories. So, yeah, it's very much answering every part of the question in the book.
Yes, and that conversation around stories retelling themselves and finding different versions of them depending on what's going on for us. I do see how that is you being interested in the stories that have mattered to you being part of that story and continuing it. And it does the lesson there in a way is don't be afraid to ask for what you want. You know, you said to your publishers, actually, I want to do this. You got curious about something new.
I offered something to them, knowing that they have a hole in their schedule with my name on it. So that's slightly a different thing. I mean, they responded. They could easily have said, "No, we'll just wait a year," or "We don't like this, do something else." Yeah,
it's still a fact that being unafraid to ask for something that can be hard for some people. It's useful when it isn't hard. Another thing that is a conversation that I come back to around the ghost stories, something that I just truly loved, an English ghost story, not to pick favourites or anything, but what I've come back to again and again, among other things, is that not every author, and certainly not every beginner author, treats people like people. I think what I do love about how when you're mother figures, sisters, I have never felt with you that there's any sort of hat/mask putting on. They are all people. And I would love to say that is my experience of writing more generally, and it's not. Is that something that you think about?
It's not something I think about, but it is something I work at. I mean, there are actually, there are some boring technical things that you do. I mean, actually, it's really, you can see it in A Christmas Ghost Story, which has two viewpoints, a middle-aged mum and a teenage son. And it's just a question of doing things like going through and keeping the vocabulary consistent. Because they're mother and son, they share a lot of language. But because they're of different generations and have different interests, they also have divergences. And it is just going through and keeping, a vocabulary consistent, and even ways of thinking, little verbal tics, types of references, things that one is interested in that the other isn't, and just keeping those come out. And it is sort of simple and mechanical, and I don't think you can do it unless there is an underlying sort of belief and sense in these people as people. But there are ways that you can finesse it, that you can make sure the reader picks up on it. I'm very big on point of view. I think it's kind of important that you don't have a bunch of characters who basically represent the author and have similar points of view. So I quite often try and do that. And that's sort of difficult if you're writing about a milieu of, say, a story where you have a bunch of people who are the same age, who have a shared language. Then you have to give each of them a quirk, Robbie Horse or something. And sometimes character arises out of plot. Someone's a coward because you need them to be, or someone's brave because you need them to be, for the story to work. But that's quite, that is a thing that you can address in the writing. And it's a thing that you can make work.
Yet, when you are in a world like Something More Than Night, where it is so strongly based on people who existed and have shaped.
I haven't done that often, but I did. I think it's the only time I've written essentially a whole novel from the point of view of somebody who was not only real, but also a writer. And that required, for listeners who don't know, it's a book about Raymond Chandler. And one of the things I did was I put all his novels into one big file and would occasionally go through and see, because he was an American, but he was brought up in England. So he writes a lot of British stuff. Philip Marlowe, it sometimes sounds rather prissy because of that. So I would go through and say, did he say trousers or pants, or whatever. And and then not using the voice of the novels, the voice of the letters, which is much more him, and also easier to do because the novels are sort of works of genius, and the letters are, stream of consciousness sometimes. But just trying to get that tone of voice, and also just finding the things that he was interested in, the things that he noticed. He said that he learned American as a second language. So he found, he loved idioms. He loved slang expressions. Some of them I think he made up, or some of them he probably got the wrong end of, but he made them work anyway, and people now use them. So that was a case where in the research phase, I did embed myself. But the Raymond Chandler of my book is a fictional character, so it's not quite the same as trying to write a historical novel, because it's a fantastical book. There's stuff that happens in it that's weird and impossible and strange. And Chandler was interested in that. He wrote one or two weird stories, and he wanted to write more. But so trying to bend a voice that was created for writing hard-boiled crime with a slightly satiric edge towards writing pulp horror, that was an interesting thing to do. I'm only just now realizing that in certainly in Something More Than Night and Christmas Ghost Story, the lead characters are novelists, which is a lazy thing that writers do because it's an English ghost story. Is she really a novelist in that? I'm not sure.
She's right.
She writes, but I don't think she's a writer.
Ooh.
No. Yeah.
Ouch.
I think she wants to. No, you're right. I'm sorry. I was thinking the lead character. Yeah, the house belongs to a novelist. Yeah. And that, again, I did think of. So, yeah, because obviously, it's what they tell you, write what you know. And obviously, I know about being a novelist. I'm not the kind of novelist Raymond Chandler was. In fact, one of the things I find interesting is writing for him was clearly much more agony than it has been for me. But I'm not a self-hating alcoholic, so that kind of is a plus in my life. But I did try and adopt the voice of a self-hating alcoholic for that. And probably the woman in A Christmas Ghost Story is slightly closer to me, but I'm not that kind of a writer either. I sort of want to go and do another story with her because I find her interesting.
Did we hear it here first?
Possibly, although there are all kinds of things that take forever to get done. But it occurred to me, having done a ghost story, I'd quite like to do a mystery. And since she's a mystery writer, she'd be a good character for an Agatha Christie type story. So that's a possible. But it's like I've got a whole bunch of other things that I might do. I'll put it like this. The book that will be coming out this year, it's called Model Actress Whatever. My first notes for it were written in 1998. Yeah, and in fact, quite a lot of and Something More Than Night took longer. I know Dracula was at least 10 years between the idea and starting writing. Quite a lot of my things, whereas A Christmas Ghost Story came from nowhere and happened. But and one or two of my other books have been like that. But most of my novels have been percolating for quite some time before I sit down to write.
Which blends quite nicely with what you were saying about, I don't think you said I don't like structure, but you implied a day where the important thing is the freedom to decide what time things happen or when things happen.
Yes,
is
that's
that right?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And that's across the work as well.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, it depends on the kind of, I mean, Christmas Ghost Story is structured by an advent calendar. It takes place from December the 1st to December the 25th. So I had to map that out, and they're all kinds of, but also you kind of want to speed up at some point. So the first 3 or 4 days of December, lots of stuff happens. And then you want to get to Christmas. Yeah. But that's how people live their lives anyway, isn't it? That's how people feel about Christmas.
Yes.
So, yeah, so that was a case where I did have to do a grid of dates and what happened on every date in order to write the story. I don't usually do that. I didn't do that with Model Actress Whatever, which is a much bigger novel. I think at some point you have to work out what time of year things are happening. You know, if they put a coat on when they go outside, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Which commercialist holiday is annoying them at the time?
Yeah, exactly. But otherwise, it's just a question of a story taking as long to tell as it takes to tell. It's a thing that, again, I tend to do quite late in the process, is try and map the events of a story onto a calendar grid. Obviously, with A Christmas Ghost Story, I had to do that from the start. But with most novels, there's a point where you think, how long is this story taking you? And you go through and work out how many nights and how many days you've mentioned. And sometimes you can find that you've compressed it too much. Yeah. You have so many enormous things happening over the course of a weekend that you think, no, any human being would be a basket case if all this happened to them then. And if that's not the point of the book, which sometimes it can be, then you have to spread things out a bit. But then you have to sort of explain what people are doing in their downtime. I know there's a question that nobody's asked about about A Christmas Ghost Story is, why isn't the kid in school? And the reason he's not in school is because I really didn't want to spend a lot of... There's a bit where I sort of mentioned he's kind of homeschooled most of the time, but I just didn't want him to leave the house for the run of the plot. So that is the case. And that meant that I had to think about what kind of a kid he is and what kind of a mother she is to do that. To as it were, homeschool him most of the time. And that's purely for something that starts as a plot point and then has to become a character point. Mm. And I hope that in the end, makes a book richer because you flesh out character ideas. Maybe character stuff comes up that you wouldn't naturally think of. And I suspect I've done that quite often over my career. I mean, one of the great issues of genre fiction is, what kind of jobs can these people have that allow them to take time off to have the adventure? Yeah. Which is why you have so many stories about reporters or detectives or freelancers or even writers, people who've got a certain amount of freedom to go abroad at the drop of a hat to chase the bad guy or whatever.
Or to choose never to and spot the things that no one else does in London.
Yeah, that's right. And so that becomes a thing that you then have to work into your story. But that means you get character stuff from it. And there are so many things that turn up just from thinking about the lifestyles of your characters. Then that shapes who they are. It furnishes their rooms a bit more.
It sounds as if not only have you built a writing day that is, forgive me if I'm overstating this, structure free, things change day to day, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm working on a novel, I kind of get into a rhythm.
But does it change for the different novels?
Probably not. I mean, with the exception maybe of A Christmas Ghost Story, because that was written, or it's not a long book, it's a novella rather than a novel, but it was written in a month. And actually, I think I did have a bit more time. I could easily have stretched out but it takes place in a month, and it sort of seemed to make sense. I didn't write it in December, I wrote it in January, but I did start on the 1st of January, and the story starts on the 1st of December. And so I kind of stuck to a calendar grid with that, mostly, and particularly with some of the historical type things. I've done the Anna Dracula books or Something More Than Night. There have been gaps where I realize I need to know stuff that I don't. And so there's non-writing days, which are researching days. Or write in the morning and then spend the afternoon trawling YouTube to see if you can find footage of Los Angeles in 1948. Bits and pieces of finding old maps and various stuff you kind of need to know that you can't research on the hoof.
But that's something else that is a very good way of putting the writing first, is when the research is a sort of reward for having done the writing in the morning, rather than, oh, look, a rabbit hole. That is a week and a half.
Yeah, and I am capable of doing that. I probably over-research and then have to cut stuff out. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do Model Actress Whatever is that because it's fantastical. There's not much real-world stuff in it. so I don't have to spend all my time looking up bus timetables and things.
So is that one of the get out of your own way things for you? Is the research addiction a thing?
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy the process. And the thing is, research sounds very elevated, doesn't it? It basically means reading books and looking up stuff online now. And I remember when it was a lot more complicated. I mean, I remember for Anna Dracula, which was written in 1991, so well before I was online in any sense, well before the internet existed as a resource. Having to do things like realizing I needed to know stuff, and I didn't know anybody who knew it, but I knew people who could tell me who knew it, and having to do phone chains to find somebody who knew about quite arcane aspects of Victorian life, which would now be on Wikipedia, which would now be a couple of clicks away of finding. You can argue as to whether the internet is reliable as a source of information, but it is there in a way that things that used to take several days to track down. I remember trying to track down the name of the chief clerk of the Bank of England, which was on a forged £5 note in one of my stories. And that was actually really difficult. And now it's not. Now you could find a list online.
Yeah. So it's all come to the writing room rather than you having to go to.
That's right. So that's right. It's a long time since I had to go anywhere to do research. Even for, I mean, obviously I've been to Los Angeles, but for something more than that, I didn't go back and walk around places or whatever. I mean, it was stuff that I did because. And it's an earlier book, Angels of Music, which is sort of about the Phantom of the Opera. It's like you can do a virtual tour of the Paris Opera House now. There's sort of room through all the labyrinthine parts of it, which is, of course, where the Phantom of the Opera is set. So that kind of stuff, you don't have to hop on Eurostar and pull strings to get a behind-the-scenes tour. Find all this stuff. It's now available. Whether that means that we now have books which are full of information that doesn't necessarily need to be there, that's another argument.
Would you say anything about what's coming next? In terms of what this year has got in it, I'd love to hear about whatever you're happy to say about the books, but I'd also love to hear whatever you're happy to say about the writing of them and what it's going to look like and feel like.
Model Actress Whatever, which took a while to write, as I say, I took a break because I got ill and wrote another book. But I got back to it towards the middle of last year and finished the draft, which is with my publishers, with Kath Treckman, my lovely editor, who's a wonderful person and always very sensitive. She will at some point give me a bunch of notes, and then we'll see how much the book has to change before publication towards the end of the year. I'm so close to it now that I don't really have that much of an opinion, so I don't know how much work there is going to be. It's also a big, expansive book with lots of characters and ideas that could be developed in other works should people be interested. I would certainly be interested in going back and doing stuff with them. I've done 3 kind of outlines which have gone to my publisher, and we'll see which of them they like me to do next. I'd like to do them all eventually. And 2 of them are projects that have been on my back burner for years. And one of them is the follow-up to A Christmas Ghost Story, which is relatively new. And I've got a bunch of other things lying about I could pick up on. And also, I suppose I've started series. I mean, I don't at the moment have another Anno Dracula idea. But the last time I had to write an Anno Dracula story, I didn't have an idea until like the week before I started it. That's always there as a possibility. I'm at the same time working on a big non-fiction project, which gets fit in between other things. And I suppose that's about it. But currently my focus is on Model Actress Whatever.
And getting all of these ideas out of your head and into the world, onto the page. Here it goes. Kim, it has, as always, been an absolute delight. If you could encourage or warn or beware at future writers, is there anything you would like to share?
Probably learn how to pace yourself, learn how to meet deadlines, learn how to get stuff done. I mean, get stuff out of your head onto the page. That's kind of a main thing. All the things that are, every advice will give you. You sort of have to have something new about everything. You have to engage people these days on the first page. That is absolutely true. That's not the same as starting with a plane crash. But you have to have something there and work on the prose. I know it can be kind of tedious, but look at the shape of sentences. Don't repeat words too often. Think hard about stuff like character names. It's difficult that most people in their life have like one or two children they have to name. Authors have to name thousands of people over a career. So give some thought to that. If you're writing historical fiction, learn what names were actually invented recently, and you'll look an idiot if you put them in if you have a medieval character called Vanessa or Pamela. Don't. But also work out what names were popular in the 1940s if you're writing then. That's relatively easy to find out, because now there are lists of what names were popular, but also think about your character's parents and whether they would pick a popular name. Maybe they wouldn't if they're strange or unconventional people, or if they're in one of those families that likes to pass down embarrassing names to their children. Think about where your characters come from, what shapes them, before you get to the story, the adventure they're involved in. Remember that other people have different obsessions to you or different habits to you. It's not so common now, but you used to be able to tell if an author was a smoker by the fact that all their characters puffed all the time, And I know that there are probably things that in fact, as a non-driver, I know that I very rarely describe driving it, but sometimes you sort of have to, and I suspect there are howlers in that because it's not an experience I have.
And thank you for making all that advice about making it fun, about making it interesting.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Entertain yourself. If you don't do that, nobody else is going to enjoy it either.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Kim Newman, thank you for joining the Writers' Gym. You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London, as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.